Dear audience, welcome to episode 3 of Thinking Psychologist. If something has brought you to this episode 3, the previous two episodes must have got your attention and you found some value in the discussion that we have had. And if you had not yet listened to what the two podcasts were all about, just to give you an idea, Thinking Psychologist is all about decoding the human mind and figuring out what goes inside our head. It works at three levels, which is an experiential level. We talk to experts in this field. We talk to a lot of scientific experts in this field. And then we look at the spiritual leaders in the field of spirituality and then try to decode the human mind. In episode 1, we spoke to Professor Paul Klein and we spoke about how we are being molested and tormented by our false self. In episode 2, we spoke to a UX designer who gave us an idea that how all the decisions that we make in our life are mostly emotional and not rational. So once we make a decision, it's basically emotional, and then we make up stories and give us ourselves false three, we're talking about a really interesting. The story is what you would have felt as well in your life, and it's an experience of getting into a state where your performance is at a peak. You lose sense of time, and uh, you feel like a different person altogether. With that in perspective, we have a fantastic guest today with us. Her name is Fresia Jackson, and we would like to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Fresia.
Thanks, Ash. I'm ready. I did my power pose for my first podcast experience.
Superb. If you get a chance, you log on to Thinking Psychologist YouTube channel, and then you can see her live as well talking, so you can guess what power pose means. Hey, just to give you an idea about who is an industrial psychologist. She's been working with a lot of startups as well as trying to look at the organizational structures and look at how human behavior can be included with jobs to gain maximum efficiency. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on the ball to Fresia to just do an introduction for our audience, please.
Sure. Yeah. So happy to be here. Maximum efficiency, but I also hope that's happiness as well. So I think those have to go hand in hand, not just efficiency. So a little bit of background about me. As Ash mentioned, I have my master's in industrial and organizational psychology, and I chose that route because I thought, wow, this is amazing that we can bring psychology and human behavior to what you spend most of your life doing, which is work. But I also realized that so much of the experience that I got to have through education, through my experiences in the workplace, not everyone gets to have. And so I'm really trying to, by some of my videos that actually Ash saw, and that's how I got invited here, kind of democratize education. I don't want to use that, it's maybe a sensationalist term, but to be able to break down the barriers to education around productivity, around happiness, that I think individuals could really change their lives if they knew. So that's a little bit about me and my journey.
Super. Super. Thanks for that brief introduction. And really interesting point you bring out there is that, education should be accessible freely to everyone. And that is where me and you as a millennials come in and try to leverage these new connectivity technologies that can spread the word out there. So thanks for that brief introduction. So coming to today's topic, and me and Fresia have been discussing lately on a particular experience that a person feels. So let me just give you my example. So I do a lot of customer presentations. I do a lot of coaching for students that do a crowd of 1,000 plus. And before the presentation, it's all about preparation, and what you can expect. And there are sort of self doubts, sort of aha moments, that how you can interact with the people. But most of the time, what happens is once I step onto the stage, It's like I lose sense of time, and everything that I have studied and I have practiced and what I want to communicate just comes out very beautifully. And in couple of instances, it has happened that 2-3 hours have just went past like this. And and at the end of the presentation, it's like everyone is coming down, what a fantastic presentations. Sometimes it even happens that I lose the bits and pieces of what I have communicated to the audience, because
Back.
I yeah. And this is probably what a state of flow is all about. But in today's podcast, we're going to be trying to break it down into individual pieces and try to understand what flow is all about, and then try to see if there's certain techniques, tips and tricks that every all of our listeners can listen to and adapt as it go, and also look at some scientific experiences and experiments that have happened. So all you, Fresia.
That is such a great story to show what flow is. So, flow is when you're so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. And you already said that around like time going away, not feeling that self consciousness as well. And where this comes from is Csikszentmihalyi, which today I'm talking about a lot of researchers with difficult to pronounce names. So I hope that was correct. I Googled it. And he really wanted to understand happiness. And he grew up during World War II and saw so many people losing their jobs, losing their families, and some people were still able to be happy even when those external things were happening to him. And so he looked at and he used a totally novel way of studying this, which is called experience sampling methodology. And this was during the time of pagers. So he would page people and basically just say, hey, send me back, what are you feeling right now? And what are you doing? And he was trying to see what are the key things that lead to happiness. And I think most people would think that relaxation, leisure, like on vacation, you would be most happy. And that's just not the case. The times when you are most happy, most feeling what he calls an optimal experience is when your challenges, like the challenge of what you're doing, meets the level of skill that you have. So I'm going to try and, I know this is backwards, so I'll do it over here. So if challenge is here and skill is here, when you are at a point where you're being challenged just beyond the level of your skills, you are going to be in this flow state. Whereas when you're not being challenged and you have the skills to meet that, you're going to be bored. If you're being challenged beyond your skills, you're going to be anxious. So in your story, it just shows that you're just really great at doing presentations, but it's just enough to make yourself feel challenged. And there's a few things that need to be in place in order for people to feel flow beyond just that challenge and skills. But that's making sure that you have a clear goal. So I'm assuming when you go into a customer presentation or to your students, you have some type of learning objective that you're trying to get across, and you have feedback, right? So you're seeing the people there and how they're responding to it. And that's part of the process of getting into this flow state. And you might even be intrinsically motivated. Would you say that?
Definitely, yes. Now that you break it down into such a smaller pieces, it definitely makes sense. And talking about the X and the Y axis and the skill versus challenge, the gap that you said, I guess it very much applies to the video game industry as well, because it becomes really engaging when you keep playing and the difficulty keeps increasing and your skill is increasing, and so to match that would be a really good trick. But what I would like to understand from you is uh, the level of a skill and the challenge which is going to come, how do you measure that? Is there a parametric way? Otherwise it becomes too subjective, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I like your point around video games because I think that's an example of using flow and the psychology almost against us to make us addicted and to
Yeah.
create potentially bad habits.
Yeah.
um, so it can be used in any way, right? We don't necessarily want to lose track of time when we're doing something that might not be the best use of our time.
True.
So I think that's an interesting point. When it comes to challenge and skill, it is a subjective experience. It is something that is unique to every individual. And I'd like to point out that, what makes me go into flow might not necessarily what makes you go into flow. So there's inherent differences in what, first of all, my skill level is, what I find challenging, but then also what is intrinsically motivating and what will get you excited enough to lose track of time and get into that optimal experience.
True. So talking about this intrinsic motivation again, just a little bit of more thoughts about intrinsic motivation. So, what motivates you might be really different from what your field of work might be, or those are two different aspects. So how do you bring that together? So that, for example, I was talking about achieving maximum efficiency in whatever you do. And if you are into a place where your job doesn't require to be intrinsically motivated, and those are two parallel paths, how do we deal with that?
Uh, Such a good question. And maybe I'll even talk about job crafting now because that
Please,
feels
yeah.
a perfect segue. So job crafting is based off of work by Wierzewski, which I told you. These were difficult names that I'm going to be saying today. But it's basically the idea that you can proactively kind of change what your job looks like. And of course, in an ideal state, that could be altering the boundaries of what's included within your job. So that might be, trying to change the task to things that are intrinsically motivating to you, trying to change the time that's allotted to things. But that's also not possible for a lot of people. So she also talks about changing your mindset when it comes to the job that you're doing. And actually, her original work was looking at hospital groups. And she found there was one group of people that just said, "Yep, I clean rooms." And there was another group of people that said, "I'm a healer. Like, I'm helping these people get better." And they had changed their total perspective around what they were doing to align with their values and what it was that brought meaning to them and what they were motivated around. So I think it doesn't always necessarily need to be that you're changing the tasks of your job. It could be changing your mindset around the job. Another example, which I love, is so someone who's an actor, but they also need to make ends meet, so they're a telemarketer. Well, when they're reading their script and talking on the phone with customers, that's an excellent opportunity to be practicing their acting, right? Even though that doesn't exactly sound like the same thing. So how can you change your mindset to align with what your values are? But of course, the ultimate job craft is just to pick another job that is better aligned, if you
So
can.
is that the reason, most of the, organizations worldwide are looking towards more of a value-driven organizations where the employees themselves feel that they're adding a value and their values are aligned with the overall objective of the organization?
Yeah, I think so, because when people feel like they are taking part in something that's bigger than themselves, you're going to tap into something that isn't just transactional. I go to work and I do this job and I get a paycheck, but this work is what brings me meaning. And that doesn't always have to be the case. You can find meaning in other ways, but if you're able to tap into that, you're going to, as a company, have people who are working harder, working better, but as an individual, you're also going to feel more fulfilled. So I think it's a win-win.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, recently I, read one of the articles where it was said that, someone was asking a question saying, my passion is different from my job, and my job pays me. So how am I supposed to make passion my mainstream? And I guess it's coming from Gary Vee, if you know him. He probably said that if once you realize how much of your following the passion is being funded by your actual job, you'll actually start respecting it.
That's so good.
You know? So, most of the people are running behind, I want to make passion my mainstream. But the moment you realize that the passion is being funded by your job stream, that's where it becomes interesting, and you would like to change the things around you, and try to look inside you and change you like intrinsic motivation again.
Yeah, that's a funny one that you bring up because I live in Baltimore and there's a museum called the American Visionary Art Museum. And the whole concept of the museum is it's artists who are not like classically trained. And so many of the artists, when you read their bio, it's like they were postal workers or they all had these jobs that they didn't necessarily find were lighting up their passion, but they were seen as just a transactional job that they were able to, do the 9 to 5 or whatever that time was to then channel their passion into something else. So I think there is times when that works if you aren't able to make money from your passion, but I think the ideal for everyone would be that those things are aligned.
Fantastic. Hey, coming back to our topic of discussion of flow again, how do I cultivate flow? If my listener wants to, you already told us about challenges and the skills matching. How do we cultivate this activity of flow so that we are more often into that flow?
Yeah, so the first thing I do is think of yourself as a study participant and the researcher. You can do your own little experience sampling methodology and start to just tap into, choose different times every day to ask yourself, how am I feeling? What am I doing? Is this making me motivated? Am I coming away from this energized, or am I feeling drained after this task? And that will help you see what are the things that are already inherently bringing you flow that maybe you haven't even recognized or noticed, since flow in and of itself will make you lose track of time and lose that self-consciousness or not even realize that you're bringing attention to it. So that will give you kind of a list of things that these are the parts that make me feel flow of my work, of personal life, right? There might be even chores. I can get into a state of flow when I'm doing dishes because I just find that maybe it's challenging to me. My husband would agree. He says that sometimes I miss spots. So seeing what are those things that bring you flow and then starting to try to create more time to devote to those things that bring you flow.
So keep just stop what you're doing and just be thinking about what you're thinking. Maybe again that connects so much back to what meditation practices are doing these days, where we just stop and think about our thoughts, and then you are sort of able to take in only the positive ones and push out all the negative ones out, which is called wisdom again. So that pretty much connects. Other day we were having a discussion about the stillness, and you had some interesting ideas about the stillness where you had practiced meditation. Would you like to speak something about that? And if that relates to the flow, is it able to, you know, is that a method that we can help as a take as a step to move towards flow?
That's a great question. Yeah, I admitted to Ash that I haven't been very good at a meditation practice, but that I was reading Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday and trying to practice stillness. And that's where my idea for Take 5 with Fresia, my little video series, came from. And I think that stillness, meditation, mindfulness, these are all things that can help you have self-awareness of what are the things that I feel energized by, what are the things that I want to do more of. Because without self-awareness, I think you can end up just going through your day quite rote, end up doing whatever is asked of you, but not thinking about how does that feel internally and how can you cultivate that within yourself, which I think relates to step 2, which would be first just knowing when you're in flow, and then step 2 being identifying your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So Csikszentmihalyi, he actually said that he thought different people had different natural capabilities for getting into flow, and I disagree with that. I don't like that idea. That feels very cynical, because then that would mean that you couldn't create that for yourself. So I think that if you're able to identify your strengths and the things that really get you excited, then that's how you'll be able to almost hack yourself into flow. When you're doing those things, you'll be more likely to get into that mental state of losing time. And so there's a bunch of different ways that you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Gallup's Strength Finder is one. I also really like the VIA, Values and Actions Strengths Assessment, which is by Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology. And I like it because it's free. I always like recommending free things. But once you identify what are those things that maybe you can do that by yourself through meditation and self-awareness, but sometimes it helps to have an assessment and then say, does that feel accurate to me or not?
Which is your most favorite the strength evaluation and identification tool? And could you elaborate a little bit more about it?
Sure. I like the VIA strengths, and I can send you the link so that you can add it down below or wherever you add any sort of notes to the podcast, because it goes into all the research behind it. It's a really easy, just self-assessment. There's, I think it's 24 different factors or values, and then they ask questions that you just have to agree or disagree with, and they tell you, what are the things that are your biggest strengths. So what are the things that you're naturally is part of your character. So for me, it's love of learning and curiosity are my 2 biggest strengths, and I've found that to be incredibly true, and is probably the reason that I do what I do.
Yeah, perfect. Everyone sort of once you slow down your thoughts and try to understand why do you do what you do, is then it all starts to make sense. And I was recently doing a course on Buddhism and modern psychology. So where they were talking about how Darwinian's natural selection has created us as human beings. So think yourself as the creator of this universe, and you have to design animals like me and you, whose only job was to pass on the genes to the next generation and nothing else. So then he talks about is that the genetic codes that I would write would include the first thing is that every time the animal achieves a goal, for example, I complete this podcast or I get a new job, he will give me a little bit of happiness, which is a serotonin or a dopamine rush. And then the genes will make sure that those happiness fades away instantly. So you don't get it. So the longing is still there. And that's what Buddha said as well. Whereas there's always an undercurrent of yearning, of incompleteness, of wanting something more and more and more. Like a donut, after some time the happiness would fade away, you would crave another donut that way. And the third thing he said was that the focus, once you're trying to achieve something, your complete focus is gonna be on that part and not the evaporation of the happiness. So, for example, your marriage thing, your complete focus will be on eating that donut or getting that new job, and it's not that oh, I'll get bored in this job, or the donut will finish, then I'll need craving for more. If you look at it, the evolution which has happened, it has been designed that way. And what's coming out from our discussion and your discussion as well, that this natural selection uh, doesn't really want us to keep in the state of flow all the time, maybe because it will reach to everyone becoming excellent, and the fight for the opposite gender would you know it'll become more difficult. So that is where our brain is always delusional and distracted, maybe. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, if it were easy, then everyone would be doing it all the time,
True, yeah.
right? So it needs to be something that you cultivate, and probably, uh, yeah, as you mentioned, a creator wouldn't want us to be in flow all the time because then we're not thinking about uh, having babies, procreating. We're thinking about whatever the thing is that we're
Yeah.
actually doing, and we're doing it for its own sake, not for the goal itself, but the process. That's also an important part of flow. And when you mentioned that, I was thinking about how, you know, so many of us don't think of our own lives that way, of we are the own creator of our lives. And how are you designing your life to create the opportunity to have an optimal experience, to get into flow, to use your strengths, to use your time in the way that you want to. And I don't feel like that's something that's uh, ingrained in us as we grow up.
Yeah, a lot of these psychologists that I've been talking to have been talking about the belief system. You know, what it's like when we are from the age 2 to age 7, as we are growing up, we ask a lot of questions. But we ask about what is this? So if your dad tells you it's a tree, then you don't go and ask question him. Is this really a tree? It might be a pen or it might be something else. So similarly, if a child falls off the bed and looks at the parents, if the parents are smiling, he won't relate that feeling and the thought to pain. He will relate it to happiness, and that's how our belief systems become, where we do not question. And those belief systems, I personally believe, is coming from what your surroundings, of how you have grown up, and those belief systems being formed. And most successful people that I have seen, who are very good at stage and very good at what they do, had a good upbringing per se. And there are a few examples where there were the challenging scenarios in their lives and still they were successful. But belief system is has a lot to do, have got a correlation to what your state of flow is as well, wherein you are able to look at what your inherent motivation or intrinsic motivation, where it is coming from. And probably then, so I will look at it at 3 steps, as you already said. Look at my, where is my motivation coming from? What is my strength? And then, is there a step in between before we can reach the flow, or is it that motivation, finding strength, and then reaching the state of flow?
So you need to create a situation where, well, first you need a goal
Right.
around
Yes.
what you're working on, and a situation where you're getting feedback on that continually, so that you are continuing up the path of increasing your skills, increasing the challenge, increasing the skill, so that you can continue to be in flow and not get into a bored state. So there needs, if you're just working on something alone and you don't have some level of feedback. So for example, like sports are a great example. Even throwing a basketball, getting a shot, clearly you can tell I'm not a sports person, but that provides feedback of if you're getting better, right? So whatever you are working on, you need to create something where you are able to see if you're getting better so that you can continue to test what your skill level is and increase that challenge.
Ah, that's a good example that you gave of basketball, wherein we are getting instant feedbacks on. And if I look at this scenario in my personal life as well, once I am getting off the stage after a presentation, I should probably get instant feedbacks and ask for those feedbacks because that will probably help me improve as well.
Exactly. I'm all about feedback.
Yeah, super.
And what you mentioned around, your upbringing and what does that mean for flow, I do think there are people who are maybe more naturally go into flow. Like they've already identified in themselves how to do that. But I don't think it's impossible. Like everyone should be able to if you take those steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there was an interesting study for job crafting. There were so many studies that showed those people who job crafted were more likely to be happy. And of course, there's always the question, like, are they happy so then they job crafted? Like, are the type of person who job crafts, are they just happen to be more happy? And so she, Wrzeniewski, she actually randomly assigned people to those that would go through a job crafting exercise and those that wouldn't. And it was a double-blind study, so their supervisors, their colleagues didn't know who was in which group. And she found that over time, the people who actually job crafted and were in that group were more likely to be seen as happy by others even, and to be rated as more performing better by others as well as themselves. So that's showing that it's not just a type of person or your upbringing, but that if your environment encourages that, then you can also get those benefits.
So, I use this really interesting quote that now you put it, is that did Steve Jobs design iPhone or iPhone designed Steve Jobs? So, so, because once there is a success, then people try to, as you mentioned as well, create that environment around you, and your persona becomes like that, where you are thought as this person. And then, perfect thing of job crafting, that he created an environment of innovation where a lot of designers, where a lot of thinking were happening. And probably those designers didn't feel job crafted. It was a completely different thing. Or the perception of what job is like at the grass is green on the other side you know is one of the aspects.
Totally. And what you're mentioning, when other people perceive that, then you can tap into contagion as well, right? So people say, like, oh, this is what I did. And then other people with the organization also doing that. And that can just amplify the effect.
Right. Yeah. Quite interesting now. This how but any recommendations, like you just said, if our audience want to do a job crafting kind of a work, any recommendations that you would give and how they should do that?
Well, if you've done your experience sample, then you know the tasks that are motivating you, that are energizing you, and you can write down, okay, what is the percentage of my time that I'm putting towards different tasks, whether they're energizing or not, and then look at what's my ideal state, right? And what are the constraints? Because there's probably some tasks that you're never going to be able to delegate, you're never going to be able to take off your plate, but how can you start to time box and say, okay, these are the tasks that I really don't like. I'm only going to spend X amount of time doing them. Of course, it needs to be a realistic amount of time because you still need to do those things for most companies to think that you're performing well, but so that you can leave maximum amount of time for the tasks and the responsibilities in your role that are most energizing and most make you go into a state of flow.
Interestingly, just today itself, you had a video post regarding Parkinson's, some time law where, could you elaborate more on that? I found that to be quite interesting, and that sort of suits the conversation that we are having.
Yeah. So I was talking about Parkinson's Law, which basically says that um, a task takes as long as the amount of time you give it to complete.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the amount of time you have available. So if you aren't putting a constraint of, I only want to spend this much time on these tasks that you don't like, you will end up spending as much time as you have doing them and not time spending on the things that you want to be spending time. So I talked about a study in the video. I won't go too in depth there, but um, if you are, for example, reading emails, if you don't say, I'm only going to read emails for 10 minutes, then you could spend an hour looking at your emails and just scrolling through and then looking at, oh, what spam did I get? Oh, let me follow on this link. But, going down a rabbit hole. So making sure that you're really creating those constraints so that the things that you don't want to be doing aren't taking up all your time, because it's a natural human behavior to do that.
And the organizations have a robot to do that, isn't it? They're called managers, you know.
I do think managers play an important part in all of this. Asking your direct reports what energizes them, what parts of their role do they like, what parts don't they like, because that's going to, first of all, create that encouraging environment, but also you might be able to do something if you're a manager about that. And just as we said, what brings one person flow doesn't bring another person. There might be someone else in the team that loves doing that specific task. There might also be a task that's loathed by all and still needs to
you
get done.
know the point that you just made is to ask the employees on what motivates and everything. Our previous guest Mr. Rob Sutcliffe would totally disagree with that. He says that he says that we make up things to tell. It's the environment, it's the situation, and the decisions are already made emotionally. So for example, most of the focus groups which are being done for new product development, you are bringing people in an environment and asking them questions about what they like in this phone, what they want to do. It's gonna be, they don't really reply the correct thing because they do not know. Like Mr. Ford said, if I would have asked, all the people what they want, they would have said, they want faster horses because they do not know there's a thing called car altogether.
That's
So,
true. But I think there's a key difference between a focus group who's answering questions about like their consuming behavior or what they want in a product versus what they want for themselves.
hmm hmm hmm
And it comes back to what we were already talking about around self-awareness and tapping into that, whether that's through meditation or something else, so that you do know what motivates you. So I think it's on both parts of that relationship for the manager to ask, and as an individual for you to have a truthful, honest answer to that of what motivates you. Because I think a lot of people maybe have never been asked that question or even thought about it.
Yeah, quite true. Yeah, yeah. And in the interview, nobody asks you, what's your intrinsic motivation all about. They're gonna be looking at your degrees and your work experience. Yeah.
Exactly. And maybe the things that you're best at are not the things that you're intrinsically motivated to do. And then you've been socialized where everyone says, oh, you're so good at this. And you never stop to think, do I actually enjoy doing it?
Right. Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah. So finally looking at the idea of getting into a state of flow.